Night City is a corporate-built megacity where nearly everything, from housing to security to basic survival, is shaped by profit. That is what makes it such a bleak setting. The nightmare is not just that the city is dangerous, it is that the danger is organized, normalized, and built into daily life by the people who control it. In Night City, poverty is not an accident at the edge of the system. It is part of how the system works. To understand Night City, you have to start with power. The city is ruled less by public institutions than by corporations, gangs, and private violence, all competing in the same crowded space. That means ordinary people are trapped between forces that can use them, replace them, or erase them with very little consequence. What looks like freedom on the surface is usually survival on someone else's terms. The reason Night City feels so oppressive is simple. It was designed to keep people desperate, and desperation is exactly what keeps the whole machine running. Night City did not begin as a finished nightmare. It began as a promise. The idea was simple enough on paper. Build a city that could stand apart from old governments, old borders, and old failures. A place where business could move faster, where money could flow without being strangled by politics, and where a new kind of urban center could rise from ambition rather than tradition. That kind of vision sounds efficient. It also leaves room for a very different kind of power to move in behind it. That is the first part of Night City's story that matters. The city was never shaped by public stability first and profit second. It was shaped by profit first, then sold to the public as a path to stability. In practice, that meant the city grew through outside investment, private influence, and the needs of whoever had the resources to shape it. When a place depends that heavily on corporate money from the start, the people paying for it do not stay outside the structure for long. They become part of the structure. They get a say in how it works, who it serves, and what gets sacrificed to keep it running. Night City's early history reflects that tension. It was built as an independent project, but independence is fragile when the city's growth depends on private backing. Once corporations see value in a place like that, they do not just fund it, they embed themselves in it. They shape contracts, infrastructure, security, logistics, and development. Over time, the city stops being a civic project and starts becoming a marketplace with walls. It still looks like a city, but its foundation is already tilted toward whoever can pay to keep it alive. That matters because the political side of Night City never had a strong enough base to resist that pressure. A city cannot remain free in any meaningful sense if it has no durable public power behind it. When the institutions meant to protect ordinary people are weak, divided, or compromised, the vacuum gets filled by private security, private law, and private deals. Night City did not need to be conquered in the traditional sense. It only needed to become dependent. Once that happened, the corporations no longer had to rule the city openly to control it. They only had to make sure the city could not function without them. That is why the collapse around Night City is so important. The city's rise created the appearance of modern, independent success, but the systems underneath it were never healthy enough to withstand real strain. Corruption hollowed out public trust. Outside influence deepened the dependency. The result was a place that still spoke the language of freedom while steadily giving away the tools that make freedom real. A city can advertise independence all it wants, but if its security, economy, and survival all depend on private power, then its independence is mostly cosmetic. You can see the effects of that early breakdown everywhere in the city's later life. Night City becomes a place where official authority is present, but rarely enough to matter on its own. It is a place where the promise of civic order exists alongside a constant reminder that order is for sale. The city does not fail because no one built it. It fails because too many people with too much power built it for their own purposes. That is what makes Night City such a useful setting for this kind of story. It is not a ruined city left behind by history. It is a city that grew up inside exploitation. Its foundations were ambitious, but ambition without protection is easy to hijack. By the time the public realizes what has happened, the city is already dependent on the very forces that benefit most from instability, and from there, everything else follows. That dependence gave the corporations something more valuable than influence. It gave them leverage over the basic functions of the city. In Night City, the companies do not just compete in the market, they shape the conditions of daily life. They bankroll infrastructure when it suits them, they provide security where public forces are weak, and they fill the gaps left by a government that cannot fully govern on its own. Once that happens, the line between a city and a corporate estate starts to blur. The laws still exist, but the people who can afford to ignore them are often the same people who helped write the system in the first place. That is why Night City's official freedom means so little. On paper, It presents itself as independent, modern, and open for business. In practice, that openness favors whoever has money, data, armed protection, and the ability to walk away from consequences. The corporations do not need to openly announce that they run the city when they can make the city rely on them for contracts, jobs, medication, transport, weapons, and security. If a resident loses a job, they lose access to the corporate structure around that job. If a neighborhood becomes unstable, corporate forces can step in selectively, not to save everyone, but to protect assets and maintain control. That is a very different thing from a public system built to serve citizens equally. This also changes what law looks like in Night City. Real democratic power depends on accountability. Someone has to answer to the public. Night City does not work that way for long. The corporations are too large, too embedded, and too necessary to be treated like ordinary businesses, but they are not truly public institutions either. They operate in the space between state power and private profit, which makes them hard to challenge. Security forces can be hired, outsourced, or transferred. Regulators can be bypassed. Local officials can be pressured, compromised, or rendered irrelevant. The result is not complete lawlessness. It is something more controlled than that. It is a legal system that still functions, but often functions in service of corporate stability first and public welfare second. That corporate control reaches into identity as well. In a city like this, who you are can be shaped by what you can afford, who employs you, what augmentations you carry, and what systems you are locked into. Your body, your data, and your reputation all become part of the same economy. That is one of the most disturbing things about Night City. The corporations do not just sell products, they help define what kind of person can survive, what kind of person can move upward, and what kind of person gets left behind. Even survival becomes transactional. If you cannot pay, you are not simply excluded from luxury, you are excluded from stability itself. Night City's corporate dominance also creates a constant imbalance in power. The rich and connected live in a different version of the city from everyone else. They have better protection, better medical access, better information, and more options when things go wrong. Meanwhile, the rest of the population is pushed into dependency. That gap is not accidental. It is part of how the city stays profitable. A population that is scared, isolated, and competing for scraps is easier to manage than one with real collective power. So the corporations do not need to solve the city's problems completely. In many cases, it is more useful if the problems remain. Instability creates demand. Fear creates customers. Scarcity creates control. That is why the corporations are not just part of Night City's background. They are the structure holding the whole thing together, even as they hollow it out. The city still has streets, districts, laws, and officials, but the real center of gravity keeps shifting toward private power. And once that happens, ordinary people stop living under a government in any meaningful sense. They live under rules written by companies, enforced by money, and protected by force when necessary. That is the deeper nightmare of Night City. It does not merely tolerate corporate influence, it is built so that corporate influence can become the normal state of life. On the streets, Night City stops being a system on paper and becomes something people have to get through one day at a time. The city is divided into districts that may look connected from above, but in practice they operate like separate worlds. Some areas are policed, serviced, and kept relatively stable. Others are left to gangs, private security, or whichever local power can hold a block together. That divide shapes nearly everything. It determines where people can move, what work they can find, what help exists in an emergency, and how likely they are to make it through the night. Gang control is one of the clearest signs that normal civic order has broken down. In a functioning city, violence is supposed to be contained by public authority. In Night City, that authority is weak, inconsistent, or absent in large parts of town. Gangs step into the gap because someone always will. They control turf, enforce local rules, and turn protection into something people have to pay for instead of something they can expect. That creates a street economy built around fear and leverage. If you live in the wrong district, you're not just worried about crime in general, you are watching for colors, symbols, corners, and reputations, because those things tell you whether to keep walking or turn around. Cyberware makes that pressure harder to escape. In Night City, implants are not just luxury items or status symbols. For many people, they are tied directly to work, safety, and basic survival. Better hardware can mean faster reactions, stronger combat ability, quicker access to information, or simply a better chance of keeping up in a city where everyone is chasing an advantage. But that also turns cyberware into a trap. The city sells upgrades as personal ambition, but the pressure to install them is built into the structure around you. If your job requires them, your rivals already have them, or your life gets more dangerous without them, then choice starts to look a lot like coercion. The more people depend on implants to stay relevant, the easier it is for the economy to profit from that dependence. Surveillance adds another layer to the trap. Night City is not chaotic because nobody is watching. It is chaotic while still being heavily monitored. Cameras, scanners, corporate security, and data networks all give powerful groups the ability to track what they care about. The key difference is that surveillance is not shared equally. The people with money and protection get to watch. The people on the street get watched. In practice, that means the poor are visible enough to control but not visible enough to protect. If you are wealthy, exposure becomes security. If you are not, exposure becomes danger. That imbalance makes daily life feel unstable, even when nothing dramatic is happening. People learn to move carefully, speak carefully, and stay alert to the systems scanning them. The neighborhoods that are neglected show the real shape of the city. These are places where public services are thin, police presence is inconsistent, and corporate interest is focused on extraction rather than care. If a district is useful, it gets polished. If it can be exploited, it gets worked over. If it is neither, it gets abandoned. The result is a city where safety can often be bought, but almost never shared. The wealthy retreat behind guards, armor, filters, and private infrastructure. Heavily armed crews carve out temporary security for themselves. Everyone else has to rely on luck, routine, or local arrangements. That is what makes the city so hostile at ground level. It is not random danger everywhere. It is selective danger organized by class. Even routine movement through the city carries that logic. A commute, a job, a delivery, or a meeting can all turn into a calculation about territory, equipment, and who has backing. People do not just ask where they are going, they ask what it will cost to get there safely. Over time, that environment teaches caution, paranoia, and opportunism as survival skills. It also punishes trust. When institutions cannot be relied on, people lean on personal networks, street reputation, and whatever leverage they can build. That is one reason the city stays fractured. It rewards short-term advantage far more reliably than shared responsibility. So life on the streets of Night City is not just dangerous in the abstract. It is built to make safety uneven and expensive. The poor live in the gap between official order and real control, while everyone else adapts to a system that expects compromise from the start. That is what gives the city its pressure cooker feel. Danger is not an occasional interruption. It is part of the ordinary rhythm of life, and only the rich or the heavily armed ever get enough distance from it to feel truly protected. That kind of pressure does more than make life hard. It starts changing what people are willing to become. In Night City, the line between self-improvement and self-erasure gets thinner every year, because almost every path upward comes with a cost that is easy to underestimate at first. Better chrome can mean better work, but it can also mean more debt, more maintenance, more dependence on the people selling the upgrades. A stronger body can buy someone a little more safety, but it can also drag them deeper into a world where the body is treated like equipment and upgraded like a machine. The city keeps telling people that if they are not getting ahead, they are falling behind. That message is everywhere, and it does a lot of the damage. That is why cyberware is so central to understanding Night City. It is not just a style choice or a sign of status. It is one of the clearest ways the city turns human need into a market. People install tech for survival, for work, for protection, for advantage, and often because everyone around them is already doing it. Once that becomes normal, refusing to modify yourself can start to feel like a disadvantage instead of a choice. At the same time, the more someone relies on Chrome, the more they have to live with the physical, financial, and psychological strain that comes with it. Upgrades solve one problem and create another. That pattern is part of the city's design. It does not simply offer tools, it creates dependency. The social cost is just as severe. Night City does not distribute stress evenly. Wealth buys insulation, clean environments, and access to better treatment when things go wrong. Everyone else is left to absorb the damage in crowded districts, unstable jobs, and neighborhoods where institutions are too weak or too compromised to help in any meaningful way. That leaves people trapped in a constant trade-off between dignity and survival. You can keep your pride and lose opportunities. You can take the job you hate, trust the wrong fixer, or work for people you know are using you, and all of it can still feel like the least bad option. The city does not force one obvious collapse. It offers 100 smaller compromises until compromise starts to look normal. Trauma sits underneath all of it. In a place where violence is routine and trust is expensive, people learn to stay alert all the time. That kind of constant strain changes behavior. It makes people harder, faster to suspect, quicker to escalate, and less able to rest. Some turn that into professionalism, others turn it inward. Some disappear into work, augmentation, combat, or substances just to keep themselves functional. Night City does not need to break everyone in the same way. It only needs to keep enough pressure on the population that exhaustion, numbness, and desperation become common responses. Once that happens, even ambition starts to warp. People stop asking how to build a life and start asking how to survive the week. That is the real cruelty of the city. It does not just punish weakness. It reshapes strength into something unstable. A person can be talented, driven, and resourceful and still get bent out of shape by the system around them, because the city keeps rewarding aggression, speed, and short-term wins over anything steady or humane. It pushes people toward the edge, then sells them the tools to keep moving after they have already been worn down. By the time someone realizes what that has done to them, they may already be treating their own identity like another asset to protect, trade, or replace. And that is how Night City breaks people, not always through one catastrophic event, but through a constant process that turns ambition into desperation and survival into a way of life. Night City's worst trait is not that something goes wrong there. It is that almost nothing has to go wrong for it to remain a nightmare. The city is built to absorb disaster, profit from it, and keep moving. That is why so many people can live inside it for years without ever feeling like they have escaped the crisis. The crisis is the normal condition. That matters because Night City does not function like a place that is waiting to be saved. It functions like a place that has already accepted certain losses as the cost of doing business. If a neighborhood is unsafe, that becomes a market for private security, weapons, and cyberware. If housing is unstable, that becomes a condition people rent themselves around. If jobs are exploitative, that becomes a reason to take more jobs, take riskier jobs, or sell more of yourself to stay in circulation. The city does not solve these problems because solving them would interrupt the system that makes the city profitable and politically useful. This is what makes the nightmare stable instead of dramatic. There is no single collapse that explains everything. There is a chain of normalized compromises. People learn to expect that institutions will not protect them, that corporations will not care about them, and that law will arrive unevenly, if it arrives at all. Once that expectation is in place, the city can keep functioning while its residents adjust downward. They lower their standards for safety, privacy, loyalty, and even personhood. The goal stops being a good life and becomes a tolerable one. Night City also turns hope into a product. Every dream in the city has a price tag attached to it, even when that price is not immediately obvious. Want status? You need the right clothes, the right chrome, the right connections, the right image. Want mobility? You need transport, access, and usually someone willing to take a risk on you. Want to matter? You need visibility, leverage, or force. Even the fantasy of freedom gets packaged and sold back to people who are already trapped. The city offers endless choices, but many of those choices are just different ways to buy time. That is why escape is so hard to define there. Leaving costs money. Staying costs money. Staying alive costs money. Changing your body costs money. Protecting your mind costs money. Even trying to go unnoticed can become expensive if the wrong people decide you are worth noticing. So a lot of people do not really chase freedom in Night City. They chase a short list of survivable options. They try to get out of debt, get out of debtors, get out of the wrong district, or get out of whatever job is chewing through them fastest. And the city is designed to make each of those routes feel temporary. If someone climbs, they are usually climbing into a more precarious version of the same world. If they earn more, they often become a more valuable target. If they get stronger, they are expected to take greater risks. If they become famous, they become useful to someone. The problem is not that there are no exits, it is that every exit has a toll, and every toll leads to another gate. That is the final cruelty of Night City. It does not merely crush people in the open, it makes survival itself look like a successful life, even when it has emptied a person out. The city rewards the ability to keep going after damage, and then it uses that resilience as proof that the system works. In that sense, Night City is horrifying because it keeps operating with remarkable efficiency. The violence is not a failure of the design. The violence is part of the design. The dreams are not missing. They are being sold, managed, and rationed, and the people inside are left to learn, one compromise at a time, that the city is not falling apart. It is doing exactly what it was built to do. Night City endures because it turns desperation into a system and calls that freedom. It offers upward movement, but only through debt, violence, exploitation, or luck that can vanish overnight. For the people who live there, the city is not simply dangerous. It is organized to keep danger useful. That is what makes Night City so bleak. It does not promise safety and fail to deliver it. It promises choice, then narrows every choice until only the most profitable survive. The result is a place where ambition still exists, but it is constantly being harvested by corporations, gangs, fixers, and anyone else willing to treat a human life as a transaction. Night City is a world where the dream of freedom has been replaced by managed chaos, and that leaves only a thin line between aspiration and ruin.